Under the slow heat of the morning sun, MMA was born during a silence so thick the birds refused to sing. Her mother said the air had felt pressed down, as if the wind itself had paused to listen. Even before MMA could speak, her eyes unsettled people. They were green, too green. Not the playful, grassy kind but the dark, heavy color of deep forest leaves after rain. When she looked at you, it wasn't like a child staring, it was as though she were peeling something back inside you. The midwife refused to touch her again after the first day, muttering that her eyes had followed her even after she left the hut. Her father said nothing, only turned his face away whenever MMA blinked too slowly. Children whispered when she passed by, saying she always knew when someone had broken something, even before it happened. Her mother tried to protect her, told her to keep her eyes low and her mouth closed, but MMA was not a girl who could pretend not to see. By the time she was 7, people had stopped hiding their fear. It started small. A woman accused MMA of making her miscarry because she had stared at her belly too long. Then a boy claimed MMA's glance made his tooth fall out. The whispers became stories and the stories grew teeth. One evening, MMA stood barefoot outside the village hall and turned her head toward the west, her eyes wide and steady. "It will burn," she said softly, pointing at the thatched roof. People laughed, nervous, forced laughter, but that night lightning struck and the roof caught fire in 3 places. When the flames were finally put out, the building blackened and crumbled. The elders called for a meeting. No one remembered the lightning. They remembered the child who had spoken. Her aunt, a tall woman with sun-wrinkled cheeks and a voice like metal, stepped forward during the meeting. She had never liked MMA. Something in her could not stomach the thought of a girl who looked into things without permission. "This girl is not right," she said. "She is a child of shadow. What else will she destroy if we let her keep those eyes?" MMA's mother wept and begged for mercy, but no one stood beside her. Fear is a fast-spreading sickness. That night, her aunt came with a bowl of water and a branch of dry thorns. She told MMA to sit still and MMA, though her legs trembled, did not move. She watched her aunt dip the thorns into water and whisper words into the steam rising from the bowl. No one knows what prayer she said, if any. "I'm sorry," her aunt said, but there was no mercy in her voice. Only a bone-deep hunger to feel in control again. "You see too much. You leave people naked in their own minds." The first thorn pierced with a sound MMA would never forget. Not a scream. Not a cry. Just the wet pop of something being taken. She did not scream. That was the part that haunted the villagers most in the years that followed. She whimpered once, softly, as the second thorn blinded her left eye, and then she fell still. When it was done, her aunt left the hut, her hands shaking. MMA's mother came an hour later and found her daughter lying face down on the mat, dried blood streaking her cheeks. She cleaned her wounds gently, whispering words from when MMA was a baby, rocking her side to side. It's over," she repeated, though they both knew it wasn't. The next morning the sky turned gray and stayed that way. Not from rain but from something else, like dust in the wind, except the trees didn't move. The chickens stopped laying eggs. The air in the village tasted like metal. MMA survived, but she no longer spoke. Her green eyes, glassy and wide, were now milky and still. But something had changed. Where before she had looked and known things, now she didn't need to look at all. She sat for hours under the mango tree outside her mother's hut, her face tilted slightly upward, her lips pressed together. And then strange things began to happen. The chief's son, who had mocked her the week before, fell from a tree and broke his spine in 3 places. He said he had felt watched, as if something had reached for his ankles from midair. A woman, pregnant with twins, confessed one night to poisoning her sister's soup. She claimed she had seen MMA in her dreams, holding a mirror that reflected the sister's corpse. Animals began to avoid MMA's path. Dogs howled whenever she passed. Cows turned away from her scent. But still, MMA never spoke, never moved with purpose. Only sat and listened. Her aunt, now celebrated as the one who had saved the village, started to grow pale and thin. She complained of dreams where MMA stood in doorways, dripping wet and blind, her eyes glowing in a way no blinded eye should. People tried to reassure her, it was just guilt. But MMA had never touched her. Not since that night. Still, her aunt's mouth dried out. Her teeth loosened. Her eyes watered constantly, stinging as though filled with smoke. Every time she washed her face, her hands trembled, expecting blood. MMA began humming to herself. Not songs. Sounds. Low and slow like wind circling a cave. Her mother swore the air inside their hut moved whenever MMA made that sound. The thatch roof rustled even when no breeze touched the village. Some said MMA was praying. Others said she was calling. But no one dared approach her. The village held a second meeting. The elders debated sending MMA away, but no one wanted to take her into their cart. One man suggested leaving her in the forest, but his goats all disappeared the next morning, and his house was found filled with feathers from birds no one could identify. Children no longer played outside after dusk. And MMA just sat beneath her mango tree, her white eyes blinking slowly, her face turned to the clouds. When asked later why no one stopped her from growing stronger, from becoming what she would become, the villagers would only say, "We thought we broke her." They didn't know. She had only just begun. They buried them deep beneath the irako tree, the jar clinking softly as it struck the tangled roots below. Her eyes, green as glass and filled with too much knowing, were sealed inside with camwood paste and river salt. The villagers watched in silence as her aunt, whose hands still shook with the sting of the act, pressed earth over the jar with more force than needed, like trying to keep something from climbing back out. That night a hush fell on the village. Not the kind of hush that brings peace, but the kind that feels like the breath before a scream. The elders said nothing, only nodding when the priest muttered that balance had been restored. But no one met MMA's face again. She had not cried when the thorns were pushed into her eyes. She had not cried when the women dragged her into the square, bound in raffia and shame. But now, back in her aunt's compound, lying on the mat they gave her out of obligation, she wept with no sound. She had no eyes, but she had not lost her tears. MMA learned the new world slowly. She learned the breath of trees, how the irako sighed different from the guava, how banana leaves whispered in layers. She learned the direction of people's feet, who walked with shame, who dragged secrets. She listened to the insects as they moved around the clay walls of her hut, and to the rats that scurried only when her uncle approached. But it was the silences that taught her the most. The way the house grew still whenever her aunt passed. The gap between one cough and the next from the old man next door. The held breath of a lie. She began to count the silences like beads, each one sliding over her fingers, forming a necklace of truths. The first to fall sick was the chief's youngest son, Adigo. He had stood in the square, calling her a demon. He had picked up a stone and thrown it with more laughter than anger. Now he could not speak. His mouth gaped like a fish in dry sand. The healer tried herbs, oils, even prayer, but the boy's tongue remained frozen. Then the healer's apprentice, the one who had held her shoulders down while her aunt blinded her, began coughing blood. It came in fits, each one worse than the last, until his chest rattled like a broken calabash. His mother claimed poison, but no one believed her. Next was the goat that always butted her when she passed the pen. It lay down one afternoon and refused to rise. Its eyes, once bright, turned cloudy green before it stopped breathing. Still, MMA said nothing. She sat in the shade of the irako tree each morning, her face tilted slightly toward the buried jar. She could feel it, the presence of her own gaze still alive, pulsing beneath the soil. Sometimes, when the wind passed over the tree, she thought she heard the soft click of glass tapping root. She became a thing of fear. Children stopped throwing stones at her door. They left small gifts instead, a handful of roasted groundnuts, a strip of cloth, a shell. Mothers dragged disobedient sons past her hut, whispering threats, "Say sorry to the blind one, or your mouth will twist like a Digo's." The aunt who had maimed her began dreaming of thorns. Every night, the same dream. She stands in the middle of the forest and her feet are rooted to the ground. Thorns grow up her legs, winding up to her throat. She tries to scream but only blood comes out. By the third week she stopped sleeping. MMA never asked for any of it. When she had her eyes, she used to look at the stars and see stories. She used to watch ants for hours, fascinated by their tiny, perfect rituals. She saw when the wind was about to change, or when a snake slithered too close to a baby's mat. But no one wanted her to see beauty. They only remembered the fire she had warned them about, the one that still burned in the memory of scorched yam barns and a collapsed shrine. They had blamed her for knowing. They had feared her truth. Now they feared her in a different way. The village tree stopped blooming. No flowers, no fruit. Its leaves turned a dull gray-green, curling at the edges. The birds no longer nested there. Even the bees moved away. When someone tried to cut a branch for firewood, the sap came out black. An elder declared the tree cursed. Another said it was punishment for breaking harmony. A third elder, who had wept quietly the day of her blinding, went silent from that day on. MMA sat there anyway. Every day. One morning she woke to find a string tied around her wrist. It was made of palm fiber, wet and cold. When she tried to remove it, it tightened. Her aunt came outside and screamed, not at the string but at what followed. A trail of tiny footprints, water-dark and glistening, led from the door of the hut to the base of the irako tree. The trail had no origin. The prints simply began like someone had stepped out of the air itself. That day a dog howled from morning till dusk. The next day the priest's wife fainted near the stream. When she was carried back home she muttered only one word over and over, "Eyes, eyes, eyes." The village slowly realized something. The girl they had tried to erase had not vanished. She had simply changed. People began to say she listened to more than sound. That she could hear the way truth bent in someone's throat. That she could feel your soul sweating. That she no longer needed eyes because what she saw now wasn't light, it was consequence. The women who used to gossip by the well grew quiet when she passed. Men lowered their heads. When she walked through the market with her bamboo stick, a path opened before her like wind parting tall grass. Still she did not speak. Not when they offered her food and begged forgiveness. Not when a child came crying to her saying, "I saw them bury the jar. I didn't throw the stone. I wanted to, but I didn't." She only touched the child's head, then walked away. One night, thunder cracked the sky wide open. The tree split. It happened just before dawn. A sound like thunder, but deeper, like the groaning of a god waking from sleep. The villagers rushed out to find the irako split clean down the middle, its heart hollowed. At the base, the soil had shifted and the jar had risen. Untouched. The next day flowers bloomed again. But not on the tree, they bloomed in the path of Mma's footsteps. And that night her aunt fled the village. No one saw where she went. Some say she ran into the forest and was never seen again. Others say her voice was heard screaming from the old shrine, and then nothing. Mma stayed. She built no shrine, made no demands. But the villagers began to change. They told stories to their children, not of the girl with cursed eyes, but of the girl who saw too much and still chose silence. They began teaching children to listen before they shouted, to wait before they struck. Mma sat beneath the new tree they planted, and though she never saw it, she knew it was blooming. In the jar? They say it still hums quietly in the roots of the earth. Not angry, just awake. The house where Mma lived now was made of silence. Not wood, not stone, just silence. Thick, breathing silence that bent with her steps and sighed with the wind. People in the village thought she had vanished into madness after her blinding. They didn't see her anymore. They didn't want to. But she was still there. Still walking. Still listening. Still seeing, though not with the eyes they had taken from her. She first knew something had changed the day she walked out of the house alone. It wasn't planned. Her aunt had gone to the market. Her cousin, who once laughed when the thorns were driven into her face, now watched her from corners with an unease he couldn't explain. That morning, Mma sat still in the dark, her hands folded over her lap, listening to the low hum of the house. Then she heard something else, something outside. A whisper of leaves. A breath of someone's fear. Her head turned without thinking. Her feet followed. She walked barefoot through the courtyard toward the sound that had no sound. Not a voice but something older. It guided her through the gate. Her cousin called her name once. She did not stop. That was the day the first villager fell. It was the butcher, the one who had shouted loudest when they dragged her to the ground and bound her arms. His laughter had been sharp as knives. He'd spit near her when she cried, saying, "She sees too much? Let her see this." Now, days after her walk, he was found behind his stall, meat flies crawling on his lips, whispering nonsense to a sky that wouldn't answer. His wife claimed he kept saying he couldn't breathe, though no blood touched his lungs. Just dread. A heavy thing that weighed down his body like stones in the belly. When the second one fell, Mma's name returned to mouths and whispers. The teacher who had called her abomination, for writing about dreams in which the sun bled and people turned to smoke, she fell next. Her hair turned white overnight. Her eyes rolled as though seeing what no one else could. The village priest said she screamed in sleep, hands clawing the air as if fending off things no one else saw. Mma's name rose again. Now with fear, not mockery. Some swore they saw her walking through the fields at dusk, her bare feet dry even when the soil was wet. Her head tilted to the sky as though speaking to clouds. Children said she didn't carry a stick, yet never stumbled. She walked straight, always straight, and anyone in her path moved aside without knowing why. Then came the whispers. Not from her lips, she hadn't spoken in months, but from the air around her. When she stood near a person, it was said you could hear names in the wind. Names that weren't yours. Names of the dead. Names of the forgotten. Names of those yet to die. No one could explain it. No one wanted to. One woman, brave with sorrow, approached her. Her son had disappeared the day MMA was blinded, and she'd always wondered why. "Did you see it?" she asked, weeping. "Did you see who took him?" MMA reached forward. Her fingers brushed the woman's hand. And without saying a word, she turned and walked. Later that night, the woman followed the direction MMA had faced, and found her son's shoe buried beneath a man's yam patch. The man vanished before morning. Soon people started locking their doors tighter, not because of thieves but because of truth. MMA was no longer blind in their eyes. She was something else. Something too open. She became the mirror no one wished to stand before. At night, she sat beneath the tree where her eyes had been buried. She never asked for them back. She didn't need them. The tree, once blooming bright yellow every spring, now stood dry and gray. Its bark flaked like old skin. Its roots cracked the soil. And every time MMA sat there, villagers said the air turned still. Even the birds would stop singing. It was as though the tree was listening to her thoughts, or perhaps confessing its own sins. Some said she was in communion with something older than the gods. Something that had lived before names were invented. Others said it was the spirit of the storm that had once danced in her green eyes. Then came the day she returned to the school. She stood at its door before sunrise, unmoving. When the teacher saw her from the window, she locked the doors and tried to pray. But the prayers stuck in her throat like dry bread. Her mouth tasted of rot. Her eyes ached as though 1,000 suns had looked back at her. She dropped to her knees and began to sob. MMA did nothing. She stood there until sunset, then turned and left. The next morning the teacher packed her things and left the village. No one stopped her. No one dared. There were stories, too, of the animals. Dogs who howled when MMA passed. Birds who grew silent. A blind goat that followed her for miles, until she rested beneath a baobab and laid her hand on its head. It died peacefully, they said. Without fear. As though blessed by whatever lived in her silence. She no longer slept in houses. Her aunt, frightened beyond words, had tried to keep her locked inside after the third fall. But MMA vanished that night. The windows were still sealed. The door still barred. But her bed was cold. Her cousin claimed he saw her walking across the pond, not around it. That same cousin stopped speaking a week later. Just fell mute. Not from illness. Not from fear. From shame, they guessed. He never met her eyes again. And always there was that sound. Whispers in wind, footsteps in dust, the air turning colder when she approached. Even those who believed in mercy avoided her path. Not because she hurt anyone, but because she saw. She saw everything. One day a new traveler entered the village. A man, smug in gold ring, talking of power and coin. He laughed when he heard the rumors of a blind girl who walked with death at her back. "I've seen true witches," he scoffed. "They bleed like anyone else." That night he slept in the inn. In the morning his bed was empty. The sheets dry. But the pillows soaked. No one asked questions. They found MMA sitting by the village stream, her hands dipped in water. Children crept closer. She smiled faintly. For them she always did. And when a small girl asked, "What do you see when you close your eyes?" MMA turned her head. "I see what the world tries to hide," she whispered. Her voice was the sound of falling leaves. Of thunder rolling softly in the distance. Of old things waking. The girl nodded, not understanding but sensing the weight of it. And in that moment the sun broke through the trees, and cast no shadow behind her. Because she no longer walked in light or dark. She walked in truth. It began with the mirrors. At first it was just the one above the wash basin. A clean diagonal crack from one corner to the other. Her aunt thought perhaps the glass had grown old, or maybe heat had warped the wood behind it. She tossed a rag over it, annoyed but unsurprised. But then the second mirror cracked. The tall one in the bedroom. She'd been checking her face in it, trying to trace the years she'd gained since the girl's blindness. That time the glass didn't just crack, it shattered. A hairline fracture bloomed like lightning down the center, splitting her reflection in two. She swept up the pieces muttering to herself, blood running from a shallow cut across her palm. That night she dreamt of a soundless scream. No mouth. Just eyes. Green. What? So. By morning 3 more mirrors had cracked. The one she used to adjust her earrings. The small one on her dressing comb. Even the old dusty one she had forgotten in the guest room, shattered without anyone touching it. The house had gone quiet. Too quiet. No birds sang outside her window. The wind didn't visit anymore. Even the walls, which used to creak and settle with age, now stood eerily still, as if they too were listening. Her husband had died long ago. Her children lived far. She used to enjoy the solitude, the silence. But not like this. Not the kind that feels like breath held. Not the kind that felt watched. She stopped using mirrors. She covered the remaining ones with cloth and stayed away from reflections. But that did not stop the other strange things. The water would no longer boil. She noticed it one afternoon trying to make tea. The fire burned strong beneath the pot. The flames licked and danced. But the water remained still. Cold even. She added more firewood. She blew into the coals until her cheeks turned red. But nothing changed. She moved the pot to another fire. Still nothing. She lit a new flame from scratch using matches and dry leaves just to test the water. But again, it would not bubble. Would not heat. Would not move. She tasted it. It was bitter. Not like salt. Like stone. She poured it out only to hear it hiss as it touched the earth. Like oil. Like a living thing angry to be discarded. That night the same dream came again. This time the scream had no sound and no eyes, but still, somehow she knew it saw her. On the third day the walls began to whisper. Faint. Murmured. A sound too soft to hold but too sharp to ignore. A rustling of names. Not hers, but names she recognized. Names of the girl's friends. Names of neighbors. Names of those who watched and did nothing. One by one their names curved into the corners of her house like smoke. She tried to leave. She packed a small bag, left the front door open, and walked down the path toward the market road. But when she reached the gate, the house stood before her again. Same chipped paint. Same open door. Her bag was already inside, resting against the kitchen stool where she had first placed it. She laughed bitterly. Went out again. Took a different path this time. Followed the neighbor's fence. Turned where the cassava fields ended. But again the house. Standing before her as if it had moved while she blinked. She rubbed her eyes. No, not possible. She was just tired, that was all. Too little sleep. Too many broken mirrors. She sat for a while staring at the house. Then tried again. She made it farther this time, past the stream down the main path, where the trees grew wide and the earth felt softer. She began to feel a strange sense of hope. Like perhaps it had ended. Like perhaps whatever madness had filled the house hadn't followed her. And then she turned around and saw it. Her house. Behind her. Standing there at the edge of the field as if it had grown legs and walked. She fell to her knees. Inside the house the floors had gone soft. When she walked she felt her feet sink slightly, like the wood had absorbed too much water. But there had been no rain in weeks. She checked the windows. All shut. The roof intact. And yet the smell of mildew and wet bark clung to everything. Her clothes. Her bed. Even her breath. And then came the footprints. They started small. Faint. Wet outlines on the floorboards just beside her bed. Always facing the window. Always vanishing before they reached the door. She wiped them away only for them to return the next night. And the next. Until one morning she found them leading away from the wardrobe. The wardrobe. It stood in the corner of her room untouched for years. She had almost forgotten what was inside. Some old clothes, a blanket or two, maybe a shawl. But something about it now felt heavier. As though someone had packed a secret into it, locked it behind wood and iron. She opened it slowly. Inside it rained. Real rain. Falling from nowhere. Soft. Persistent. It dripped from the top like there was sky hidden behind the ceiling. The clothes were soaked. Her shawl clung to itself like skin. She reached out and touched the back of the wardrobe, and pulled her hand away wet. The floor beneath it was dry. She shut it quickly. But the sound of the rain continued for hours. Even after she pressed towels at the base. Even after she piled books against the door. Still she heard it, drop by drop by drop. That night she dreamt of the girl again. But not screaming. Not even angry. Just standing outside the house, green eyes gone, face blank, staring through the window. Watching. Breathing. Still. The aunt woke with a gasp. The room was dry now. But her mouth. She tried to say something. Anything. But nothing came out. No sound. Not even a gasp. She clutched her throat. Tried to clear it. Coughed into her palm. Nothing. Not a single whisper. As if the air inside her had been stolen. She looked toward the window. Outside the sky was still. No wind. No birds. But just beyond the frame, something moved. A shadow. A girl's height. The curtain fluttered. MMA had not knocked. She had simply passed. Passed by the house once, like a breeze that didn't care if doors were locked. Like silence with feet. Like water that forgot how to be held. And with her, she had taken the last sound the aunt would ever make. By morning the woman could not speak. By afternoon she could not scream. By evening even her breath made no noise at all. The villagers did not come to visit. No one brought soup or stories or questions. It was as if they too had heard the silence, had seen the girl outside their windows, had tasted the water that would not boil. The house stood quiet now, and in the back of the wardrobe it still rained. He had watched from behind the grain shed the day they dragged her to the clearing. MMA, small and barefoot, hadn't cried when they pushed her down. The fire had already consumed the old widow's hut. No one knew how it started, but the moment MMA said, "It will burn," and it did, she became the story everyone feared. They said she'd summoned it, that she watched the flames too calmly, that she saw it before it came, which meant she brought it. Ikon was just a boy then, 12, mouth too soft for defiance. He had wanted to speak when they held her down, when her aunt reached for the thorn branch. He had clenched his fists, but fear had filled his throat like ash. And when MMA screamed, he ran, not to stop them but to hide. He told himself he was just a boy, that grown-ups knew what they were doing. Years passed. MMA no longer walked with hesitation. She moved like she knew the ground better than anyone, head tilted as though listening to the heartbeat of the earth. Her eyes were gone, but her presence unsettled the village. Her face was calm, still too calm. Chickens scattered when she passed. Babies stopped crying. Dogs bowed their heads. Ikon couldn't stop seeing her, even when she wasn't near. And so one day he began walking behind her, just close enough not to be noticed. He followed her from the market to the stream, from the edge of the woods back to her small clay home by the abandoned well. He never spoke. He only watched, the way she used to watch everything, quietly, constantly. He told himself it was penance. Then one afternoon, as she stood beside the old shrine wall, he stepped closer. Her back was turned, her face lifted slightly toward the wind. The sun made her skin glow amber. Something in him wanted to laugh, to break the silence. To remind her she was just a girl once and he was just a boy. "I used to wonder if you blinked," he said aloud. She turned, not startled, just aware. "Why are you following me?" she asked. He swallowed, rubbed his palms on his shirt. "I didn't mean to, it's just... I remember that day." Silence fell between them like a dropped bowl. Then, stupidly, nervously, he stepped forward and raised his hands. "Do you still remember what it feels like?" I mean. And before his mind could stop his body, he gently placed his palms over her closed lids. It was a mistake. His skin hissed. He pulled back with a cry. His fingers had blistered instantly, the way yam skin bubbles in boiling water. He stumbled, holding his hand to his chest, breathing hard. MMA's face didn't move. "You don't get to touch what you let them take," she said softly. "I didn't know," he blurted. "You watched." He nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "I did. I watched." And then he said something he hadn't even admitted to himself. "The fire wasn't your fault." She didn't respond. "I know because I saw the elder's son that morning." He knocked over the lantern. "He didn't tell anyone. They were going to beat him. So they blamed you." Still she didn't speak. Ikon took a trembling breath. "That's why they were afraid of you. You always saw things. You would have told the truth. And they knew it." Wind stirred between them. MMA turned her face toward it. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have spoken then." She moved past him without a word, feet silent on the dirt. The air felt heavier where she had stood. He looked down at his burned fingers, wondering how deep regret could go. He thought she would never acknowledge him again. But the next morning he woke to find a jar of cool water outside his hut. In it floated 3 small rose petals, soft and white. His fingers no longer hurt. The skin was whole again. And across the surface of the water, when the wind shifted just right, he swore he saw her reflection, not with eyes but with something deeper. Something that didn't need sight to know who deserved what. From that day forward, he followed her again. Not in guilt but in reverence. Not in fear but in hope. And when people asked why the wind changed when MMA passed, he simply said, "She sees what matters." And no one dared to doubt him. MMA did not ask for eyes. Not once. After the thorns took them, she never cried for what was lost. And yet, she never stumbled either. From the very first day, she walked as if something else had taken over the task of seeing for her. Something older. Something watching her, just as she had once watched the world. She walked through the dense forest where even hunters feared to go, past roots that twisted like serpents and trees that dropped poisonous pods on strangers. But MMA never tripped. Never faltered. The trees swayed gently when she neared, their branches bending just enough to guide her forward. In the places where the ground split into hidden gullies, the wind would rise in her ears like a warning hum, and she would pause just before the earth gave way. The forest did not test her. It cleared the way. A trader from the south once said he saw her walking alone on a narrow cliff road known for landslides. He kept his distance, watching, heart in his mouth. A rock rolled down toward her path, but stopped mid-slide as if caught in invisible hands. He said even the clouds moved aside when she passed, letting the sun touch her shoulders like a blessing. He told this story again and again in every market, until people began bringing food to leave in her path: groundnuts, fresh water, warm cloth, carved beads. Not as offerings to a god, but as acknowledgments. She was not divine, they said, only deeply true. MMA never spoke of revenge. She did not whisper names or curse her past. But those who had harmed her began to feel her presence before she even entered a space. Her aunt, the one who had plucked her eyes out, took to bolting her door each night and murmuring old protection prayers, though no one had seen MMA come near. One night, the aunt awoke to the sound of soft footsteps circling her house, slow, measured. Nothing happened. But in the morning, every mirror in her hut had shattered. Every bowl cracked down the middle. The village chief who had sanctioned MMA's punishment developed a pain in his spine. He told no one at first. But when he saw her at the river one evening, turning her face toward the setting sun, he dropped his gourd in fear. He swore she nodded slightly in his direction, though no one else saw it. That night his pain grew worse. He confessed everything on his sickbed the next week. Not to clear his conscience but to be seen, truly seen, before death came for him. Children were less afraid. They walked behind her at a distance, trying to mimic her slow, precise steps. Some swore she knew when they were following her, even when they didn't make a sound. One brave child once offered her a small bird carved from wood, its wings outstretched. MMA accepted it with both hands, and for a moment, her face lit with something close to peace. Travelers from distant villages began to speak of her. The blind girl who walks rivers without falling. The one the forest follows. The one whose steps make animals turn and listen. They never said her name as though it was not theirs to use. Only the very old remembered it, and even they whispered it like it was a spell. MMA walked through every place that once held fear for her. Through the hut where she had been blinded. Through the path where the village boys once threw stones at her. She did not stop. Did not speak. But those who watched her pass said they felt their guilt rise like smoke in their throats, choking, undeniable. One night as she crossed the river, a crocodile rose from the shallows. Wide-mouthed. Hungry. It stared at her. She turned her face toward it. It lowered its head, tail curling in the mud, and slipped silently beneath the surface. From that day, fishers began saying the river was safer when MMA walked it. They began timing their nets with her crossings. Some left yams and dried fruit on the riverbank in her honor. She did not ask for worship. She never even smiled when they knelt. But they kept kneeling. Because in her silence, in her steps, was the kind of knowing that made even trees lean to whisper. That made wind bend sideways. That made guilt impossible to carry without breaking. And wherever she went, the path saw for her. The widow had once been loud. Loud in the market, loud in the meetings, loud when she pointed to MMA and said, "That girl brought the fire. I saw her looking at the sky just before the wind turned. I felt her eyes on my child." People believed her then. She wore grief like a royal cloth, and her trembling hands made her lies look like truth. MMA had said nothing in her defense. She had simply stood still, her green glass eyes reflecting the flicker of the flame she had warned them about. Years passed. The widow's voice grew quieter, but not from guilt, only from age. Still, the memory of what she'd said clung to her like the black cloth she never stopped wearing. No one brought her the fruit she once received after her husband's death. No one carried her basket anymore. The other women did not speak of her, they only looked away. She tried to forget. She tried to believe she had been mistaken. But the lie curled like smoke inside her, darkening every room she entered. Then one morning she saw MMA. She had just come from the river, balancing a gourd on her head, barefoot and tall as a tree grown wild. Her eyes, hollow and sealed, turned in the widow's direction before her steps paused. Just for a breath. Then MMA moved on. The widow could not sleep that night. Her throat felt dry. Her dreams turned to ash. And before dawn, she made a decision. She wrapped herself in a plain white cloth and walked to the village square, where people gathered before their daily labor. She didn't wait for anyone to ask her anything. She simply stepped forward, eyes lowered, and turned in the direction where MMA often sat beneath the baobab tree. "I have something to say," she began. But the words did not come out. Instead, A plume of white mist slipped from her mouth like winter air. The people around her froze. Again she tried. Her lips moved, but frost spread from her breath to her chin, her chest, her arms. It curled across her skin like vines of cold. Her hands turned pale and stiff. Her eyes filled with panic. She fell to her knees, clawing at her throat, but no sound came, only that strange, creeping frost. People gasped. One woman tried to run to her, but her feet refused to move. Then they saw MMA. She was already walking toward the widow, her cloth damp from river mist, the carved bird still hanging at her waist. She moved slowly but with the weight of something older than justice. She stopped beside the widow and knelt. The frost had now reached the widow's hair, turning it silver with ice. She shivered, lips blue, eyes wild with terror. MMA reached out, her blind hands finding the widow's frozen ones. Then she hummed. The song was old. Very old. The kind of tune grandmothers sang when no one was listening. The kind of lullaby that softened even hard hearts, that called memories from hidden places. A song of rain and early dusk and warm laps. The sound slipped through the square like wind through grass. And the frost began to melt. Slowly, water dripped from the widow's sleeves. Her breath returned in short gasps. The crowd watched, silent, as color returned to her cheeks. But MMA did not stop humming until the woman opened her mouth again, and this time words came out. I lied, she said, her voice cracked but clear. I lied because I was afraid. Because my child died and I needed someone to blame. I needed the pain to have a name, and hers was the only one I could reach. The village listened. Some closed their eyes. Some looked away. MMA said nothing. The widow turned to her, kneeling low until her forehead touched the dirt beside MMA's feet. I'm sorry, she whispered. If you will not forgive me, I will understand. MMA rose. She reached out and gently touched the woman's shoulder, then turned and walked away. Behind her, the wind stirred the frost into mist, lifting it like breath from the earth. The widow stayed kneeling long after the square emptied, and when she finally stood, her voice did not tremble again, not because she had been healed, but because the truth had finally been spoken. And truth, once heard, has no need to raise its voice. The harvest festival arrived with the usual noise, drums that shook the dust from trees, laughter that spilled from the mouths of children like ripe mango juice, women in woven skirts twirling with beads clacking at their hips. Smoke from roasting yams and goat meat filled the air. Even the gods, it seemed, had opened the sky for celebration, letting in sunshine just gentle enough not to burn the cheeks of the dancing girls. Everyone was expected to come. Even the quiet ones. Even the grieving. Even MMA. She did not dance. But her name hummed through the crowd like a secret song, half praise, half warning. Some said she walked the edges of the forest with the animals, barefoot and unbidden. Others claimed she had begun speaking to the river and that the river finally answered. Still, the elders insisted on her absence. Not openly. Not with words. But when her name was mentioned by children or women in passing, it was always met with silence from the council. A silence made of fear. And yet they could not erase her. The tree that had once bloomed beside the village square, the one under which her eyes had been buried in a jar, remained stubbornly bare. No leaves. No flowers. Even in the season of plenty. The children no longer played near it. And once, a woman who tried to hang cloth from its branches for the festival found her hands covered in blisters by morning. So this year the festival was held farther from the tree. Closer to the river. The elders made sure of it. They sat in a half-circle around the sacred fire, each holding a carved staff, symbols of their power. Their youngest member, Elder Udoka, had prepared a special speech, one he had rehearsed in front of his wife and daughter. It was meant to honor the gods and calm the lingering fears around MMA. She is no longer of concern, he'd said while practicing. We are a village of peace, not superstition. He did not know that peace, like fire, needed truth to keep burning. As the last drumbeat settled and the crowd gathered in front of the elders, Udoka stood. His robe shimmered with embroidered suns and birds. His voice was smooth as oil. This year, he began, we give thanks not only for the harvest but for the safety of our village. The rains came and our children did not starve. The winds passed and our homes stood strong. We give thanks for the gods' mercy, for their justice, and for their guidance when we were blind. The word hung in the air, blind like an arrow loosed too fast. He continued. Some time ago a young girl lost her sight. You remember? A sorrowful accident. The gods chose to close her eyes and open her ears. She was not punished by us, no. She was chosen. And now she walks in mystery as the spirits intended. He smiled. But no one clapped. Not one drum responded. The silence was not just quiet, it was wrong. Thick, uneasy. Even the wind stopped. And then the air turned cold. Children leaned closer to their mothers. Torches flickered blue at the edges. Elder Udoka shifted in his sandals, confused. He opened his mouth to speak again, but a gust of wind blew out the flame at the center of the sacred fire. People gasped. Then they saw her. Mame. She stood near the edge of the crowd, near the fire that had died. Her head was bare. Her wrapper was simple, the color of riverbed stone. The carved bird still hung from her waist, but it no longer looked like a charm, it looked like a warning. Her eyes, though sealed, pointed directly at the elders. She did not speak. She did not need to. Udoka took one step back. Mame, he said, his voice suddenly uncertain. Child, you are welcome here. Come sit. Join your people. The wind pushed his words back into his mouth. She moved forward. One step. Two. The earth beneath her feet did not crunch. It did not whisper. It simply made way. Someone in the crowd began to hum, a low, broken note that might have been grief or fear or reverence. Others joined. It was the sound people made in mourning, but no one had died. Not yet. Elder Udoka looked around as if the other elders might help him. But none met his eyes. Then with no warning he gasped. He clutched his chest and stumbled backward. His staff fell from his hands, landing with a crack. No one touched him. No one stood near him. And yet he dropped to his knees, mouth wide in a silent scream. His body shook once, twice, and then went still. The people screamed. Women covered their mouths. Children wept. The other elders rose, but too slowly, too late. Mame remained standing. Not a flicker of sorrow passed across her face. The drummers, whose hands had hovered in frozen air, slowly lowered their drums. One by one they turned them over. The harvest festival was over. Someone called for help, but no healer stepped forward. Not for Udoka. His eyes remained open, fixed on something no one else could see. Elder Oba, the oldest of the council, rose with trembling hands. He turned toward Mame and knelt. We are sorry, he whispered. He lied. We lied. You did not fall. You were pushed. We said nothing. We watched as they took your eyes. We told the village it was divine judgment. But it was fear. It was fear that made us monsters. Mame listened. And then, for the first time in years, she opened her mouth. Her voice was soft, but it echoed as if carried by wind through hollow trees. You gave thanks to the gods for the rain, she said. But it was not the gods who cried for your harvest. It was me. No one moved. You spoke of blindness, she continued, but it was not me who could not see. It was all of you. Someone began to weep. She turned to go. And as she walked, the sacred fire sparked again, not with red flame but with silver, like light on a river at dusk. It rose slowly, curling upward into the sky, and every torch in the square flickered back to life. But the drums never played again that night. And though future festivals returned in time, the air never fully warmed again. In stories told afterward, people remembered Elder Udoka differently. Some said his heart simply gave out. Others believed he had been cursed for lying beneath the eyes of the dead. But a few, the ones who whispered, claimed Mame had not truly left that night, that her spirit lingered, watching, waiting. And on the anniversary of the festival, the drums were kept silent by choice. For silence, it seemed, was now the only language left for truth. The storm came suddenly, without thunder, without wind. Just rain, thick and silver like spilled metal, falling so hard it drowned all other sound. In the center of the village, where the old tree had stood for generations, the earth cracked. Roots surfaced like ribs. And from the soaked, broken ground, something glinted faintly, a jar long buried, now unearthed. No one saw it at first. Not until morning, when a small boy named Obina, chasing his goat through the mud, tripped over it. He stared. The glass was cloudy, but inside, two green orbs floated, too perfect to be stones, too unnatural to be eyes. But Obina remembered stories. His grandmother had whispered them at night, about a girl whose sight was stolen, whose eyes were buried to silence her gift. He lifted the jar, trembling. And though the rain had stopped, the ground beneath him remained damp, pulsing like a heart. He took the jar and ran, not to his parents but to the woman in the woods. Mame sat under a tree, hands resting on her lap. She was humming. She didn't turn her head as he approached, though he knew she had heard him. Obina stood before her and slowly held out the jar. For a long time, Mame said nothing. Then, without a word, she reached for it. The moment her fingers touched the glass, the air shifted. A wind spiraled around her ankles. Leaves lifted. And the eyes inside the jar, still as stone for years, began to glow. Softly. Green light flickered across her face, then faded. MMA did not cry. She did not smile. She simply held the jar to her chest for a moment, then set it down beside her. She placed her hand over her own closed eyelids and whispered something too quiet to hear. That night the village changed. It began with the woman who beat her son behind closed doors. She woke screaming, soaked in sweat, claiming she saw a girl with green eyes standing at the foot of her bed, silent and watching. The next morning her hands were blistered. She could no longer raise them. Then the merchant who once sold MMA's parents spoiled rice. He felt a breath at his neck while counting coins. Turned. Nothing. But every time he tried to speak after that, salt poured from his mouth. But not all visits brought fear. An old woman, blind for years, wept with joy when MMA passed her hut. She looked at me, the woman whispered, and my pain stopped. A young girl, shunned for a stutter, saw MMA at the river and fell to her knees. MMA looked at her, held her hand briefly and walked on. From that day the girl spoke clearly, only truth but clearly. People began to speak carefully. Lies grew heavy. Guilt became heat in the bones. And no one could pretend innocence if MMA turned her face toward them. She never used a stick. Never stumbled. Her feet knew the path. Her ears the leaves. But now, with the jar always near, something deeper had awakened in her. At night Obina saw her sit beside it, humming. The eyes glowed dimly. Sometimes she lifted them, held them against the sky, then gently set them down again. She never tried to return them. As if she understood, they weren't just hers anymore. They had become something else. A measure. A warning. A mercy. Once, a group of men from another town came to ask her to bless their harvest. They brought gifts, knelt and begged. But one of them, the youngest, couldn't stop shaking. MMA tilted her head as if listening to something distant. Then, slowly, she turned her face toward him. He collapsed. Not dead but emptied. Later he confessed. He had poisoned his brother's food. No one had known. Not even him, fully, until she looked. That was the true terror. MMA's gaze didn't just see actions. It awakened them. Some say her eyes now burn inside people's minds. Others say they don't need to be warned to see, they simply exist, always watching from the edge of memory, of conscience. Children still play beneath the old tree, though it never blooms. But they know the story. And when they see a stranger walking barefoot through the village, silent, hands folded, they step aside. They bow. And they do not lie. For the girl who sees what kills is no longer blind. She simply chooses how she sees. They came in silence, the ones who'd heard. From distant villages, across rivers and over mountains, they followed only whispers. No signs marked the way. No road led to her. Still they found her, under a tree beside a fire, on a quiet ridge just outside where the wild met the living. Some came to beg for mercy. Others came to confess. A few came to test her. None left unchanged. MMA had grown into a woman, tall and narrow as a reed. Her hair was always tied in a single braid. Her skin bore the color of rain-wet earth, and her feet were never covered. She walked slowly, sometimes humming, sometimes still. The jar of glass eyes no longer followed her, it stayed buried again. She no longer needed it. Those who had once mocked her name now sent their daughters to watch her walk. Her silence had become a language of its own, one the guilty understood too well. If MMA looked at you for too long, something inside you stirred. Your heart might stutter. Your stomach might twist. You might remember what you had buried deep. A slap. A lie. A laugh too loud at someone else's suffering. In the village of Yuzu, she paused beneath the mango tree where a young girl had recently disappeared. Her parents cried and offered coins, yams, cloth, but MMA only touched the tree. Then she stood still. Minutes passed. A crowd gathered. No one spoke. When she turned and began to walk, the people followed. Down the hill, through the sugar cane, to the edge of the river. She stood there until a man in the crowd fell to his knees, sobbing. "I didn't mean to push her," he said. "It was just a shove." They found the girl's body wrapped in reeds not far away. And from that day the man was never seen again. Some say MMA whispered to the water. Others say he simply walked into the river and never came back. In another town, far north, an old chief offered her land to stay. "We need someone like you," he said, "to keep order." But MMA only smiled, softly, almost kindly, and moved on. She belonged to no village now. Her path was wide, unclaimed, and always walked alone. People began to say she could see death's shadow before it touched a soul. A sick baby she passed would live. An elder who laughed at her would fall silent days later. A hunter who denied taking a girl's livestock grew boils on his tongue. Even strangers who lied near her began to cough, as though their lungs were full of dust. But it wasn't punishment MMA brought. It was something older. Something truer. In every village she visited, silence arrived before she did. The children watched the trees more carefully. Women began to ask each other real questions. Men lowered their voices when they spoke of their daughters. Old crimes rose like smoke from cooking fires. One evening in the village of Obodo, a young girl sat beside MMA without fear. Her eyes were bruised, her voice hoarse. She didn't speak. MMA didn't ask her to. They sat like that until the girl's father came looking, drunk as always. The villagers watched from behind their doors. But as the man stepped into the clearing, MMA rose to her feet. She did not shout. She did not touch him. She only looked. A long, quiet look. The man collapsed. Blood from his nose. Froth on his lips. The girl did not blink. After that, stories changed. MMA was no longer a warning. She was a line that could not be crossed. In time, other girls, ones who had been silenced, struck, broken, began to speak her name when they were alone. They carved it into wood. They whispered it into jars and buried them beneath their beds. When danger came, they dreamed of green eyes and felt safe. And slowly, a strange thing happened. People stopped stealing the sight from girls. Stopped punishing daughters for speaking or crying, or knowing things they weren't supposed to know. MMA never claimed credit. She kept walking. Through markets, over hills, into places where even the birds stopped to listen. And every time she passed, truth rose like mist from the ground. It curled into homes, into ears, into bones. They call her many names now. The seer. The one who listens. The echo of the buried eyes. But to those who knew the first story, the muddy scream, the blind child, the jar beneath the earth, she is still just MMA. The girl who sees what kills, and keeps walking.